I guess I was busy talking while I was on mute. So, welcome to the March webinar, Rebuilding for Speed. I apologize to having to reschedule last week's webinar to today. Having some personal issues with family members who are not sick from COVID, but sick in the way that people used to be sick, and I had to travel out of town to do some care. So, thank you for joining us today, whether you're here live or watching the recording. And we know that as a result of the global pandemic, that organizations have removed boundaries and have broken down silos in ways no one thought was possible. Decisions and processes have been streamlined, and frontline leaders have been empowered, and hierarchies and bureaucracies dismantled. Essentially, we have seen lots and lots of changes going on. And so in this webinar, we're going to be looking at why we can't return to normal. And I want you to really understand this, that we can't just go back to the way things were, but we need to create a new normal that results in rethinking our ways of working, reimagining structure, and reshaping talent. My name is Linda Nelson, and I'm core president, and I am taking care of this webinar for you. And just as a reminder, I do some work with the ISO community, have some meetings this week and next week in crisis management, for example. But a lot of the content that you're going to see here today is directly aligned with the work that's being done in ISO 22316, Organizational Resilience Principles and Attributes. We are going to explore why organizations should create a new normal that results in rethinking ways of working, reimagining structure, and reshaping talent. Those will be really the three buckets that we're going to look at today. Just as a reminder, you can watch the recording of this webinar, maybe tomorrow, but we usually just go by 2 days just to give ourselves an outside chance. And if you have questions, use the questions button. I am on my own today due to the reschedule, so I will answer questions at the end of the webinar, and I'll just stay on and answer any questions that there might be. Also, as a reminder that attendees will receive a certificate of attendance if you attend a minimum of 35 minutes. And one of the questions that's always asked is, will I get a recording of this webinar? Will I get a copy of the slide deck? And we don't give out the slide decks, but we do give you access to the recording for 30 days, and then it goes into our members only library. So I kind of entitled this one new, not just new business challenges, but really newer. We've seen change happening at a pace that was pretty fast before, but obviously COVID led to an unprecedented change in really how organizations do business. And we had to make that change almost overnight. I am sure myself, just like a lot of you, are thinking about where we were a year ago. And I remember the first week of March, I was teaching a class in Washington, D.C. here in the U.S. And, students just kept leaving to take calls from work. And, we were really concerned that people were going to be able to complete the class. And we know now that if it had been a week later, we wouldn't have had a class because everything would have already been shut down. I feel like it's been a long, long time since I've been on a plane. And so it really was changes almost overnight. We've seen, not just during COVID, but obviously before that as well, a constant introduction of disruptive technology. So we've seen established businesses and industries being replaced by technologies, and that's not going to change. That's going to continue. That's been happening, since the olden days when everything was done by hand. We've seen that, but it's going faster and faster as technology is growing faster and faster. We're also seeing an accelerating, these are big words now. I figured we'd start with some big words today. Digitization and democratization, I believe is how you say that. But, information, we have more and more information than we can handle. And just managing information is sometimes very overwhelming, that volume of it. And then we have to be transparent with it. And then how do you distribute that information? And this requires organizations to rapidly engage in, not just communication, but multi-directional communication, and to collaborate with your customers, your partners, and your colleagues in ways that you may not have done before. And finally, and this is going to be a topic that what you will hear us address over and over again, is this new war for talent. And this may be frustrating, if you've been out of work. But, as creative knowledge and learning-based tasks become more important, organizations really need a distinctive value proposition to be able to acquire and retain the best talent. And understanding that your talent is often going to need to be more diverse as well. So these learning workers have more diverse origins, more diverse thoughts, and more diverse experience, and they may have different desires from the people who you normally hire. And oftentimes we've thrown out, the millennials have kind of thrown the workplace for a loop, meaning that they want different things than maybe the people that you've hired before. And now we've got the Gen Z and whoever else, whatever they're calling the Gen Y and the Gen Z, whatever they're calling the new ones, that our workforce base and who we hire is changing as well. And I thought we could start with something I was familiar with, which is one of my favorite Bob Dylan songs. The times they are a changing. When we look back into the 70s, we thought times were really changing then. But our fast changing world and this challenging business environment really requires organizations to adapt quickly to change and have high levels of resilience. So normally I start with some kind of a definition for resilience, but or definitions of what it is that we're talking about. I push this one off just a bit because I want you to understand that agility, adaptive capacity, and resilience are all very much interrelated. So the definition from the International Standards Organization that was adopted already 5 years ago is that organizational resilience is the ability of an organization to absorb and adapt to a changing environment, to enable it to deliver its objectives and to survive and prosper. And I start with this because even though this has been adopted internationally, I see definitions for organizational resilience that might look similar to this, but not exactly the same. Um, so it is interesting to see that it hasn't been totally adopted yet, but I still believe that this is the best definition that's been adopted, and it's not just based on responding to some kind of a disaster. It's not reactive. It's out in front. And so then we're looking at, okay, if resilient organization needs to be able to absorb and adapt in a changing environment, that really means they need to be agile. And in fact, in some countries, the definition for resilience is almost the exact same definition as agile. So this is a term applied to organizations that are quick in responding to change and managing change, which is something that we said we needed to do under resilience. And finally, this adaptive capacity is really the ability to manage your change and to be able to adjust to potential damage, to take advantage of opportunities, as well as to respond to consequences. One of the arguments over the years has been that if you're going to be resilient, that you're trading off stability, and that really isn't true. Organizational models people have been thinking that you have a choice between being stable and efficient versus being dynamic and nimble. And this is an argument that many organizations have said, this part of the organization can be dynamic, nimble, like your product development, for example, your R&D. But, our financial sides need to be more stable and efficient. The argument is slowly changing to be that it's not an either or, but it's a and, that you need to be stable and reliable and efficient, and you also need to be dynamic and nimble or agile. And that the two of those things combined is going to help your organization to be more resilient. So this being able to accept and adapt to change, to seize new opportunities and creatively empower the organization at all levels is what happens when you're able to do both of those things. An interesting organization that you might want to check out is one that's called Resilience First, and they're at resilienceFirst.org. And they have put together nicely, actually. It's not dry, it's not just text, it's in pictures, but some agile resilience lessons from COVID-19. And this was published, I think, in the fourth quarter of 2020. So what they did is they looked at agility and performance during this crisis. And so on the one on the left is what they said is that agile organizations were able to release products twice as fast as those that were not agile. And if you're looking at the days at the bottom, you know, organizations that don't have any agile practices actually lost time. It took them 7.3 days longer to produce something, where highly agile organizations were actually able to um, get out in front and do things in faster time than they normally do. Also, they looked at work from Glassdoor and Indeed.com to look at employee morale. And we all know that employee engagement, employee morale has a lot to do with your organization's performance. And organizations that didn't have any agility practices, and by the way, this was a self assessment piece, but they had no agility practices, were actually scored 17.6 below average. And those that were highly agile, people were happier there, and they scored 13 points above average. This is kind of making the argument for why going agile is important. They also looked at in individual organizations. So this was a self-assessment between agile and non-agile business units in the same organizations. So they're comparing themselves to other parts of the organization. And business units that have gone agile before the pandemic performed better. So here, when they look at customer satisfaction, the white color is the same. The blue means they performed better, and the black, or the really dark blue, they performed significantly better. So here is another argument where you can give evidence in saying that our customer satisfaction was indeed, you know, 93% better than the non-agile parts of our organization. And employee engagement, again, employee engagement is a key factor in employee retention, is 76% better, and our operational performance was at 93% better. It's hard to argue with those numbers, and why organizations wouldn't want to build agile into as much as their organization as they can. Next, we're going to kind of do a reminder of the 5 attributes. And resilience first happens to use the same 5 attributes as were identified in ISO 22316 and in other organizations that have identified what makes some organizations more resilient than others. But this idea of shared vision and purpose is a key piece. And so you're going to see this coming up over and over again, even in today's talk. So you need to have a common purpose and clear communications, and you need to make your communications specific and personal for employees so that they know exactly what their vision and purpose is. And they gave an example in the study of a major grocer that established 3 clear principles. And one of them was being a safe place to work and shop, which helped the company to prioritize during this COVID crisis. The outcome of that was that there was day-to-day clarity on priorities for employees, so they knew what they should focus on. Having these networks of empowered teams. And so here we need these local cross-functional teams, and they need to have clear and accountable roles. And here is where an energy company brought business leads and trade union representatives into meetings to communicate directly with the CEO. This is not a real normal set of meetings of people that you might see coming together. So in this case, that helped them to boost employee motivation as well as engagement. So making sure that these empowered teams maybe aren't normal working teams, but become teams that were put together while we were dealing with all of this massive change. Being able to make rapid decisions and quick decisions and being able to learn from what's happening is an important attribute. And so what we're seeing is that you need to have structures that enable rapid decision making rather than these periodic big bets or waiting to make a decision. And in this case, a technology company used their decision making forums to shift resources towards sectors that had become a higher priority during the pandemic. So in this case, they went from developing whatever they were developing to developing some new healthcare products that were needed at the time. We're back to culture again. We're going to continue to see culture pop up, and you need a culture focused on retaining talent, which ties to one of our other attributes. So we need a culture which empowers the front line to bring their ideas to leadership. And in this case, a grocer encouraged employees to capture new opportunities and to share them. So like, where can we get new sales from customers not eating out at restaurants? And this really helped the grocer to grow in revenues from new categories. And so the question I would have now is, all right, now that restaurants will be starting to open in the summer, or wherever you are in the world, we're seeing restaurants coming back, and you might be eating in them, you might not. But what is the impact going to be to the grocery stores and the food business when people start eating out more? How will that change? And then again, what changes will those typical grocery stores need to make in order to keep that growth that they had and not lose it? And lastly, we've talked about technology, but technology continues to provide us um, things that allow us to make faster decisions. So we need to use technology that will help us. So in this case, I'm sure like a lot of other organizations, a bank bought thousands of new laptops within days to enable remote working for their people. ICOR did the same thing, like most of you. Not everybody in the office had a laptop, so we were very happy to be able to get those. And this really helped maintain employee productivity, and and people embraced that they were given the opportunity to continue working remotely. We know that the need for speed has never been greater. I mean, we know that when the pandemic erupted, we had to change. And our normal kind of business as usual approaches to serving customers, working with suppliers, and collaborating with colleagues, or really just doing just about anything that your organization was trying to do, would have failed if you hadn't changed. So just some examples, a global telco company took 1,000 store employees that would have been unemployed and moved them to inside sales and retrained them in 3 weeks. So they're redeploying their talent so they didn't have to let people go. Another industrial factory was able to run at 90% plus capacity with just 40% of their workforce. So they found ways to improve productivity that they might not have had before. So if I wasn't one of those 40% of the workforce doing that work, no, I'd be a little bit nervous right now as to what that means for me, but also looking at launching new business models. We've seen lots and lots of restaurants and lots of delivery services that were launched very quickly. And in this case, one retailer said it was something that they were going to be doing in the next 18 months, and they had to do it in 2 days instead. That's quite a different timeline. And lastly, a lot of companies, decided to develop new products such as, ventilators, where they had equipment that they could use to do this. So what this means is that companies had to increase the speed of of decision making, and organizations in a wide range of sectors as well as geographies have really accomplished difficult tasks and achieved positive results in record time. And this is something that we need to remember. We don't want to lose this. And so, at the heart of each one of these examples is really about speed, getting things done fast and well, because organizations have been able to remove boundaries, and they've broken down silos in ways that they never would have thought they could have done before. And so, in this study by McKinsey, they talked to a bunch of CEOs from a wide range of industries, and they got some quotes from them that I thought were interesting to include. One said that decision making accelerated when we cut the nonsense. And my guess is that a lot of the nonsense was being put in place by top management, anyways. But now they make decisions in one meeting. They limit their groups or their meetings to no more than 9 people, and they've banned PowerPoint. They've got a whole pile of information about, how they've changed how they do their meetings. Another said they have increased time in direct connection with teams. So they're spending time, instead of being in meetings, like talking to the people, and then resetting the role and energizing our managers as much as they can. So they're providing support, and we'll talk a little more about that as well. Many had to adopt new technology overnight instead of over years. And what they've decided is that they have a higher tolerance for mistakes that don't threaten the business. And so sometimes when you are moving with speed, there's going to be mistakes that happen and things aren't going to be perfect. But they've decided that this need for speed is more important than the need to have everything perfect. And then looking at how they've been able to rearrange their teams. So when they've had a hard problem, they've gone to their best people. And their assumption is if our best people can't solve it, then no one can, and they're okay with that. They have reorganized, really using a problem-based strategy versus a job title strategy. And so understanding that technology and people are interacting in new ways, and this is really at the heart of new operating models that your company really needs to embrace and helping to create that effective post-pandemic organization. So the question becomes, how do you design for speed, or why do you design for speed? Um, One of the things is you'll see is greater customer responsiveness. You're supposed to see enhanced capabilities, and as we saw with that agile study, better performance in terms of cost efficiency, revenues, and return on capital. And the speedy company might also find that it has a higher sense of purpose and really an improved organizational health. And this kind of has me intrigued, and I'd like to learn a little bit more about that. But these outcomes are possible, but they're not inevitable. We need to make sure that the successes that you forged during this crisis, that they get hardwired into the new way of working, that they're not lost. We need to make sure that we don't revert to those old behaviors and processes. That would really be discouraging, to go back and stop doing the things that have made you successful. And this requires making permanent structural changes that can sustain speed in ways that will inspire and engage employees. So let's take a look at how you might design for speed. So we're going to look at 9 actions that your organization can do, and we put them into 3 different buckets. And the first bucket is to rethink ways of working. And I'm sure all of you have experienced this. But we need to speed up and delegate decision making as one of those actions. So we talked about having fewer meetings, excuse me, and fewer decision makers at each meeting. And this might mean you have less preparation for each meeting and maybe 1 or 2 documents instead of those lengthy PowerPoints. And quarterly is the new annual. This is part of having data, and having technology and data being available to you is you need to be getting your data faster. And so quarterly becomes a new annual for some of those big decisions. And this helps to increase that cadence of decisions as well. And looking at what's being called assigned to the line. So those things like non-mission critical decisions um, are delegated so that top leaders can focus on fewer and more important decisions. And understanding, again, just like we said earlier, a slow decision can often be worse than an imperfect one that's done more quickly. The second action under rethinking ways of working is step up your execution excellence, as it's called. Because conditions have been so difficult, frontline employees need to take on more responsibility for that execution, action, and collaboration. So leaders must assign responsibility to those people on the line and build what's called a closed loop accountability. And this requires clear roles and responsibilities. So everyone working on that team must be clear about what needs to be done by whom, when, and why. And that goes back to that clear purpose that we talked about at the very beginning. And employees must be equipped with the right skills and mindset to do that. They need to be able to solve problems instead of waiting to be told what to do. This changes everything completely when your teams are empowered to make decisions. But they have to be made up of people who can make decisions and aren't waiting to be told what to do. So there must be disciplined follow-up to make sure the actions were taken and that you got the desired results. And the third part of rethinking ways of thinking, or rethinking ways of working, I'm sorry, um, is that you need to cultivate extraordinary partnerships. So part of this is something that's a little bit unusual. And what this means is the partners have become increasingly important in dealing with that pace of change, because you can't do it all by yourself. It's too complex, and we've got other disruptions. It's hard to believe that there are other disruptions that are out there besides the pandemic. We're still having our normal disruptions, including our information security and cybersecurity aspects. And the rate of technological and business model innovation alone makes it nearly impossible for any single organization to do everything by itself. And so um, you need to have a relationship that's built on deep trust, by adopting more open source approach to innovation and embedding the partner into everything that's been done. So just as an example of a partnership that was built during the pandemic, Prism Health is an organization in South Carolina. It's a not-for-profit, And they had a design for an emergency ventilator expansion device, but they didn't have the capacity to build and distribute as many that were needed. So they were able to join together with Johnson and Johnson's Ethicon division. I have no idea what Ethicon means, but um, they had the capacity and the distribution infrastructure. So the two of them were able to rapidly form a partnership in order to manufacture those devices at scale. And the Food and Drug Administration in the US gave it an emergency authorization. So we just need, you need to be, I don't want to say thinking outside the box because that just seems, something that we're always saying. But sometimes you need to be thinking outside your organization and who can we partner with to be able to accomplish something that we can't do on our own. And so, this traditional boundaries between buyers and suppliers and manufacturers and distributors is changing. If you've been on any of iCore's webinars or taken any of iCore's courses, you've heard us talk about structure. And so the second aspect of designing for speed is to reimagine structure. And we need to be as flat as we can. You can't be speedy if you're very centralized. It just doesn't work. And so you need to be as flat as you can possibly be. And so a speedy organization has more people taking action and fewer people feeding what's called that beast of bureaucracy, all that stuff that drives you crazy. So, you've all been there. You go into a meeting and you brief each other, you report, you get your approvals, and then you huddle up after your meeting where you have your real conversation where you make all your decisions about who's going to do what. And we know that um, rigid hierarchies have to give way to leaner, flatter structures that allow the system to respond quickly to those emerging challenges and opportunities. And so, thinking about this, there's going to need to be fewer middle managers and more doers and deciders. And so, when you're looking at this, reimagining your structure, um, you have to think about it not as a hierarchy of bosses, like your traditional organizational chart, but rather like a dynamic network of teams. And so this network of teams really helps us to work together. As one CEO said, we can finally turn the page on the traditional matrix and reinvent how we organize and how work gets done. This is such an opportunity. I hope that your organizations are thinking of this pandemic now that we're past kind of the response phase and thinking about how we're going to, continue on really very quickly for most of us in the next few months. And depending on, how much vaccination there is in your country, it might be slower than in other countries. But the fact is that um, real-time collaboration has become really, really important. And as we've extended to kind of working in this virtual world, we really need to put people together who can work together. And the role of that corporate center must also really be rethought. So in many cases, your central functions could become capability platforms where you can deploy skills, tools, and talent where they're needed most, while they can also act for a catalyst for learning and best practice sharing. So things like, I'm sure you've heard of centers of excellence. This is a great opportunity to put together centers of excellence based on what you've learned. And you can have a goal of bringing those leading ed technologies together so that more people can take advantage of those. And here we are back to teams. We need nimble, empowered teams. So when we're looking at structure, we need teams to do the work. We've seen the large-scale deployment of fast and agile teams. We've seen small, focused, cross-functional teams working together toward a common set of objectives and that are then tracked and measured. We've seen leaders make this work by charging each team with a specific mission. Again, if they understand what their role is with the entire organization, it helps those teams to be able to do a good job. And this is the outcome that matters for customers or employees. And we're empowering each team to find its own approach and then really getting out of their way. So we're not telling the teams how to do the work, we're telling them what needs to be done and letting them figure out the best how to get it done. We know that having one fast, agile team is helpful, but having many of them across the organization and enabling them with the right structure and processes and culture makes it possible for the entire system to move faster. So here is where we get back to this idea of agile, and that we know that the COVID crisis forced non-agile organizations to experiment with the concept, and this is a really great thing. Is that it forced companies to think differently And the speed that resulted, including faster decisions, reduced bureaucracy, and better communication, are really attributes that many organizations are now working to maintain and to keep. So this is something that we hope will continue. And this idea of hybrid. So I don't know if many of you have a hybrid working model, but we're seeing that the new normal is going to see significantly more people working in a hybrid way. And I'm sure that there's many of you that are really excited to get back to the workplace and you're tired of working from home. Or maybe you've been in the workplace all along and now there's going to be more people coming and joining you. But the fact is that there's going to be a significant change in the number of people working on site. I've talked to a lot of companies that are already restructuring and reducing the number of sites that they have, and maybe where you're working, the office isn't going to be there anymore, and it might be in a different state or in a different region, different part of the country. So we know that this is all going to change, and hopefully the model that your company adopts is one that will work for you, because we need to make hybrid work, as it says here. And it can really unlock significant value. And what they're seeing is, for the most part, when the employees are part of the decision about where they work, they're more satisfied. And this brings, of course, lower real estate costs, which then gives you broader access to talent. Meaning, if you're not spending the money on infrastructure and real estate, you can spend it on people, which gives you greater flexibility because those people don't have to be within distance of going to work, and also gives you improved productivity. I will say all of this is great except for the people that are in real estate and people that are trying to keep cities running. If everybody leaves and works remotely, there is going to be a downside for all of that too. So there is a negative side of what's happening for some of you. But hybrid organizations are going to need to adopt new ways of working that build a strong culture and help people feel like they're cohesive and trusted, especially when employees are working remotely. And I'm sure you've all experienced that, where I feel like even in my small office that we can't be as creative working remotely as when we're sitting together and something comes up that's not working, or we have somebody has an idea about how to do something, and all of a sudden we're doing it within a day or two because we've just sat right there and we've stopped and we have put together an idea. We're now with everybody. I'm sitting here by myself in this office, and we have to think about it and then schedule a meeting to talk about it. And so, um, there's pros and cons. And I think sometimes the creativity side maybe gets lost in all of the remote working, as something to keep in mind. The last attribute or characteristic is to reshape your talent. And part of this is we need to field tomorrow's leaders today. And this is really an interesting concept. One of the unexpected consequences of the pandemic is that CEOs have seen into a window that shows who their future leaders are. They have seen who can make decisions and execute rapidly, who's able to take on new challenges and lead in the face of uncertainty, and who has the grit to persevere. And I really like this word grit. So tomorrow I'm doing a presentation for an organization on corporate strategy, and they're talking about um, organizational resilience within the Baldrige model for strategy. And there's actually a test that you can take to kind of self-assess your own grit. And it does cost money, or I would have referenced it here. But if you're interested, send me an email, and I can at least send you the link, and you can look at it. But this is called the grit test, and it was sort of caught my attention. But not only have CEOs gained insight into who the future leaders are, but they've also seen the value of rapidly deploying top talent to do the most important work. And so organizations that do both things, they find future leaders and redeploy talent skillfully, will be able to move faster. One CEO said that we've learned more about our people in the last 12 weeks than through our traditional HR processes in the last 12 months. So this is really something that we need to capture and we need to take advantage of and not lose it. The Ford Motor Company, back a year ago, announced that they would produce face shields for healthcare workers. This is something they'd never done before. And so, what they called a team of unlikely characters organized itself and got to work. And they tapped into their own networks to solve problems on the fly. And so, one lesson that a team member wrote is that those who step up to a challenge might not be who you expect. And stepping up to this kind of challenge requires courage by the people doing so and a mindset that encourages innovation and learning. And this is where it gets back to that culture that you'll be heard. Even if your idea is crazy, it'll be heard. And they said, we came as beginners and we got smart on the job. And being a band of beginners means if you think of it, you then do it. And there's really no time for rank. It was kind of an equalizing piece for them and really engaged people at work there. And they also, of course, were very proud of what they were able to do to contribute to helping the medical people be as safe as they could be. We've talked about learning. So reshaping talent, you need people who can learn how to learn. And we need people who can continue to learn and adapt because we know that skills can and do expire. And this may mean that you have to reskill some of your workforce and expand learning content that's available to your different employees. I know that one of my daughters was trying to take a class or take advantage of some learning that they had in their university at her job, and she was told, well, that was only available to managers. And she just asked, well, if I want to be a manager, why can't I have access to this? And they just said, oh, I don't know, go ahead, you can have access to it. And having access to that learning content has changed how she works with other people and has given her an opportunity to actually be a manager. So we sometimes we get stuck in really how we teach people within our organizations as well. So if we're hoping to reshape talent, we need to make sure that people have the right learning available to them. And we know that some of the best leadership teams have been on a steep learning curve because we've had people that have had to learn how to lead in a time of crisis. They've had to learn how to manage rapidly forming agile teams. They've had to make decisions at a much faster pace that they might feel comfortable with. And then have just being straightforward, having to learn how to adapt. And forward thinking companies are now accelerating their capability building efforts by developing leadership and critical thinking skills at all different levels of the organization, not just at the top. And this helps to increase their employees' capacity to engage with technology, to use advanced analytics, and really building some of those functional skills for the future. And we've always said when we're talking about organizational resilience that it's about learning, and you need to be a learning organization. And you can't do that if learning is restricted to just a few people in your organization. And finally, as part of the reshaping talent, we need to, and it's really this gets tied to the structure as well. We need to rethink the role of CEOs and leaders. COVID has really brought about a fundamental change in leadership in many organizations. And the leaders that stand out have shifted from directing kind of a command and control crisis response to building and unleashing winning teams. CEOs have talked about their role as energizing and empowering and unblocking their leadership teams and really letting their teams do their job. And I don't want to say that they're cheerleaders, but they're providing the support that they need so that their teams can do their jobs. And they're over investing in communicating clearly and regularly. They're trying to build trust, and they're constantly linking their actions to the purpose of the institution. So back to that very first attribute that we talked about when we started is this idea that people need to understand what the purpose is of the organization and how they contribute to that purpose. And what we're seeing is that the future requires leaders to act as visionaries instead of commanders. The command and control, your incident response team might work for a short-term incident, but long-term, when we're looking at leadership, we're not just looking at during a crisis, we're looking at leadership all the time. And leaders will be most effective if they can act as visionaries instead of commanders. They need to inspire the organization, the people within it, with that clear vision of the future, and then empower others to help realize that vision. This is going to require leaders who can build winning teams, that they can coach their players, but let them make the decisions and execute. It's literally like if you're looking at a baseball team. The coach isn't out there playing. The coach is coaching and helping to make decisions so that the team itself and the individual players can do the best that they can do, but it's individual that players that are making those quick decisions. They've been trained as to where they should throw the ball based on where, what's going on in the field. But at some point, they need to make their own decisions and to execute those on their own. And so one leader said, "I measure how I feel every day because ultimately my job is to give energy and empowerment to the organization." And that's a real different way of thinking about leadership than maybe that you're seeing at your organization. At least at any organization I've worked for, I don't think that my leadership team thought about it in that way. So, if not now, when? Now is the time. We have been given a huge opportunity with this pandemic to rethink everything, and we've had to rethink everything. And so, what we want to do is to make sure that your organization is built for speed. Remember, and maybe this is the case at your organization, I've heard from a lot of people who are just trying to hold on until everything returns to normal. And they think that they're just going to open their doors and go back to work just as they've done before. And that would be sad. It really would. You need to seize the moment to reimagine and reinvent your future. And what can we do? What have we learned from what we've been doing that we can keep? And so you've got that new muscle. You need to keep it strong and make sure that you come back strong. Because even well-run companies find that they need to reinvent themselves more than once. And there's tons of organizations that we've been around for 100 years, but we're not around now because we didn't reinvent ourselves when there was change. So when you're looking at the future, there's really four interrelated trends that are really unwinding the old rules of management. And the first one is we've got more connectivity, and this allows us to share information, and it it's going to it also speeds up disruption too. And so this connectivity is kind of a pro and con. But we have information that's moving past and challenging existing hierarchies. We also have lower transaction costs. So barriers to entry and costs to achieve scale are evaporating. And so having an internal bureaucracy really presents more friction than external interactions and kind of free market transactions, if you want to think of it that way. We've also seen unprecedented automation that's not going away. What we're seeing is that 200 years of management thinking on control and predictability is really rapidly becoming obsolete. And we're seeing fundamental societal shifts. you know, as the younger people enter the marketplace, they have different aspirations. So expect more variety on learning, more leadership and promotion opportunities, and they expect to have a social impact. So what they're looking for is not to just kind of like my parents did. They had their job. That was their job for their entire careers. They picked their job and that's where they were at. They might have been at the exact same company even. But our younger people are looking to work where they can have a social impact or work somewhere that doesn't have a negative environmental impact, for example, and a lot of career mobility. They want to be able to move around. So most forward-looking thinker or leaders are seeing this as a larger opportunity as we're finally nearing the turning point in the pandemic. And so we need to build on pandemic related accomplishments. We need to re-examine or even reimagine your identity. And what does your identity look like now? If you're in the restaurant business, or you're in the grocery store business, or you're in the transportation business, all of these things have changed a lot. And so what is it going to look like post pandemic, and how can you leverage what you've gained for the future? So there's really three characteristics of future-ready organizations. Number one, they know who they are and what they stand for. Back to the basics. I think we've talked about, why are we here? What do we do? And they operate with a fixation. Fixation is a big word on speed and simplicity. So we need to move quickly. And they grow by scaling up their ability to learn, the ability to innovate, and they seek good ideas regardless of their origin. It's not just about what top management says. And so by embracing these three fundamental characteristics, we're going to take a look next at 9 organizational imperatives that kind of underpin these three characteristics and how you can leverage those to thrive at the new normal. So you need to know who you are. And again, this is nothing new, but you need to strengthen your identity. People long to belong, and they want to be part of something bigger than themselves. Companies that fixate only on profits are going to lose ground to organizations that create a strong identity that meets the employees' needs for affiliation, for social cohesion, for purpose and meaning. And so the first imperative is you need to know why. Top performing organizations know that purpose is both a differentiating factor and a must have. A strongly held sense of corporate purpose is a company's really unique affirmation of its identity. It's the why we go to work. And this purpose helps to attract people to join the organization. It helps keep them there and helps them to be successful. So you need to make your why, who you are and why you're there, to be very real for people. And then you need to sharpen your value agenda. While all companies have a strategy on how they create value, few can precisely show how the organization's going to achieve it. And so future-ready companies, by contrast, they really avoid this dilemma by creating a value agenda. It's a map that disaggregates your company's ambitions and targets into tangible organizational elements, such as through your business units, your regions, your product lines, and even key capabilities. So armed with this, these kind of companies can articulate where the value is created in the organization, what sets the company apart from the pack, and even what might propel its success in the future. And then thirdly, under who we are, is this culture imperative, is how you do your work. And if you think about your culture as your secret sauce. So it's kind of an interesting concept. You've got a clear purpose, your why, you've got a what, which is your value agenda, and this becomes your how. We know that culture is a unique set of behaviors, rituals, symbols, and experiences that kind of describes how we do things. But among the most successful companies, culture forms the backbone, I'm sorry, of organizational health, and this is what fuels outperformance over time. Companies with strong cultures achieve up to 3 times the normal um, re- total returns to shareholders than companies without them. So, some of the telltale signs of a strong and healthy culture is when you have leaders who consistently carry out behaviors the companies aspires to. There's work practices in place that stand out and feel fresh to outsiders, and you've got innovative approaches to important moments. So everything from employee onboarding to how your meetings are being run. So we need to see specific observable behaviors that employees at all levels at the company adhere to. And this really goes beyond just having slogans painted on the walls or a catchy email in your signature line. Um, we need to find principles and ways of working that are critical to creating that cohesive, long-lasting organizations. And culture is devilishly hard to copy and really should ultimately be unique to each organization's. So when leaders choose and build the kind of culture they want, this creates kind of a cycle that attracts the right talent that'll thrive there, it unlocks your value agenda, and it really turbocharges your performance. So culture, just think about it as your secret sauce and the ingredients that need to go into that. So when we're looking at how we operate, we need to prioritize speed. Operating models need to be fast, nimble, and frictionless to create ways of working that foster agility and simplicity. They need to enable a network of empowered dynamic teams to find pockets of value, including the company's edges, where employees are closest to the customers. So to prioritize speed, you need to what's the first thing? Radically flatten your structure. We've talked about that today. So you need to adopt really models that are designed, nurtured, and grown around the people and activities of your organization. And so we've seen sort of in recent years as companies actually being more complex than ever. And this is not going to help you. We really need to become less complex and to be as flat as we can and be able to implement those teams that we talked about. We talked about decision making and why decision making is important. And we need to be able to make decisions quickly. And one of the McKinsey studies found that organizations that make decisions quickly are twice as likely as slow decision makers to make high quality decisions. And this was really intriguing to me because I would have thought that if you're making a decision fast, that it might not be as good of a decision as somebody that takes time to contemplate. And what they actually found was that organizations that can consistently decide fast and well are, of course, likely to outperform their peers. But for the most part, organizations that have all of these things in place are able to make fast decisions that are also good decisions. Anna, we've been talking about talent. We need to treat talent as scarcer than capital. We know that with all the work that we need to foster an inclusive employee experience and prioritize really having stars in every level and every position of the organization. You know, they need to zero in on really three core questions for their talent. What talent do we need? How do we attract it? And how can we manage talent most effectively to deliver on our value agenda? And this is well beyond HR department. This has to come from the top down. And this means that when you need to create an attractive destination for your talent, which means you have to have a positive employee experience. And this includes inclusion. And so when you're looking at people, another study that was done actually found that 39% of the people that were participated in the study said they turned down a job or decided not to change jobs because they didn't think the organization that they were looking at was very inclusive. So this idea of hiring people who have that are different in thought and background and experience from the people that are there is a very important aspect with organizational resilience, so that we're not just all thinking the same and our decision making is impacted by the fact that we don't understand really our stakeholders and who it is that we're trying to meet. And so um, this whole hiring practice becomes very, very important. And lastly, our last three set of imperatives is how you grow, and you need to build for scale. And building for scale means that you need to be prepared for this idea of being nimble and having and constantly adapting if you're going to hope to grow with any consistency. To do that, you need to have constant interaction with your stakeholders. You need to manage your technology as well as work with your employees. So you need to harness this vibrant ecosystem of partners, and we've talked about utilizing partners outside your company's traditional boundaries. So you need to adopt an ecosystem view. And this really means, and actually Tesla is a great example of this. So back in 2014, they made a really radical decision to open source its patents because they knew they needed other companies to use its intellectual property in order to make sure that their electric cars that they were producing would actually be usable. And they knew they couldn't create that whole ecosystem. So they needed partners to create that. And they couldn't grow without charging stations and other services that really helped build the infrastructure to support those electric vehicles. So Tesla put itself at the center of this ecosystem of partners, and then it laid the groundwork for its own growth. And I see that in the future that's going. I don't have an electric car, but I think that we're all going to be looking at that in the next 5 to 10 years. And so looking at partners as extensions of yourselves, and that you look at partners and developing trust and mutual dependence so that you're able to share value and let each partner really focus on what it does best. We also need to have data-rich platforms, and this data-rich platforms are really tied to understanding that data is the business. We have to take data seriously, and it isn't simply reporting about what's happening in the business or answering a business question. Data can continually empower decisions and becomes part of your value agenda. So to make the most of data, leading organizations are tackling the complex set of tasks, and they're creating compelling approaches to data governance. They're also redesigning processes as modular applications, and they're trying to tap in the benefits of the scalable cloud-based technology as one example. And finally, we're back to learning again. We need to accelerate learning as an organization. And if this doesn't create an opportunity for us to learn, I don't know what would be a better example. So your organization needs to promote a mindset that continuous learning and be able to encourage and support people to adapt and reinvent themselves to meet those shifting to meet those shifting needs. So we need to move from a mindset of coping to one of going back to competing. We've talked about this idea that for some of us, we've just been getting through. And now we need to get back to thinking about how can we become future ready and become back to the competitive environment and take advantage of all that's there if you haven't already been doing so. So you need to take advantage of kind of this unfreezing opportunity to imagine and create new systems and modes of organization that are more flexible, more integrated, more resilient, and ultimately more human. And those organizations that view themselves as interconnected systems that constantly experiment and fail, they learn and they grow and they start the process anew, and that world invariably changes again. This idea of being able to fail is a really important aspect, one that's beyond our talk today, but I want you to think, consider that as well. Just to summarize in our closing, COVID-19 has caused the largest and fastest shift in human behavior change at scale ever. Digitalization is already underway in almost every organization. This shift has accelerated the adaptation of digital technologies as well. So, to not let the crisis go to waste, we need to challenge our basic assumptions about how to create, deliver, and capture value. Some of the two trends that have stood out is that marketplaces are indicating that companies must adopt digital business models in order to compete in the future. And also, calls are rising for companies to lead in addressing societal changes. So building on that digital technology, it really gives you the potential to create value for all stakeholders while making your business models more inclusive, more sustainable, and more trustworthy. And I want you to notice this reference here. It's the World Economic Forum.org, so weforum.org. And I'll have this on the next slide in a little bit bigger, but this is from a digital readiness assessment and some studies that were done by the World Economic Forum. And what they found is that 80% of executives think their current business models are at risk of disruption. The actual business model itself is a risk to their organization. And that 60% of companies that have undergone digital transformation have created new business models in order to work with that. What they're seeing is that 70% of new business value over the next decade will be through digitally enabled platforms. And we see the $60 trillion mark. I don't even know what that looks like, by the way. But digital ecosystems could account for more than $60 trillion in revenue by 2025. That's only 4 years from now, or more than 30% of global corporate revenue. So to realize this potential that's out there with digital technology, you're going to need to determine where your value exists, what business models you can use that'll capture that, and which capabilities will support the adaptability and resilience that most business models require. So the World Economic Forum has put together a widget or a digital readiness assessment, and you can go online. It's free. And we just don't have time to do it here today, but I encourage you to take a look at this. And they've created 3 assessments: a market driver assessment, which looks at the urgency to adopt a new business model given a market disruption and competitive landscape. They've got a value assessment, which helps you to assess the value of your organization, um, where it's targeting, and to identify which business model archetypes might be best support your goals. And then they have a capability of a guide, which is to assess your organization against the key capabilities required to support some of these new business models. So take advantage of this. And if, again, it's included in the references piece of this as well. So what we know is that this crisis is widening the gap between winners and losers. And your reactionary environment is not strategic leadership, which is really the whole topic of the conference that I'm attending tomorrow, is strategic leadership. And we know that hope is not a business model. So it is time to reinvent. If your organization has not reinvented now, they need to do it. They need to take advantage of it. And whatever new business model you look at must strike the right balance and integrate the digital, physical, as well as the human world. So in closing, with the famous words of Peter Drucker, the greatest danger in turbulence is not the turbulence. It is to act with yesterday's logic. And if we've learned nothing else this past 12 months, is that we need to be looking forward and to be thinking to the future, and not relying on old logic. There are quite a we've got 6 references here that you can take a look at. And again, if you want me to send you those in a link, just I can copy and paste them and put them in. I can do that for you. And I just want to invite you to next month's webinar. We're going to be looking at the workforce specifically, what that workforce is going to look like. So some of the things we've talked about today will go into more detail. And then we have a guest speaker in May, on May 5th, that's going to look at how to do internet and media monitoring in the context of crisis management. And then we'll move on to looking at the post-pandemic workforce itself. And just because of time, I'm not going to go through all of them. I also want to know if there's a person on who gave me um, advice in the last webinar, which was, if you're running out of time, don't talk faster. So I have worked my very best to not talk faster, which I'm really good at talking fast. So that was kind of a challenge. We encourage you to sign up for the webinar series the rest of this year. And of course, contact us to learn more. We appreciate your attending today. And if you have any questions, let me move to the questions piece. I wasn't actually able to see the questions while I had this on. So just give me 1 second to see if we had any questions. Doesn't look like we have any right now. So feel free to send any questions that you might have to the education@theicor.org email, and we'll be happy to reply to you there. Thanks again for your attending today, and we will talk to you next month.